Hi, I'm Tom Batchelor. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Microsoft, and today we're going to talk about an introduction to Office 365 and Azure Active Directory. Identity management is really interesting because you have to do something about it before you use Office 365. You can't just use Office 365 without thinking about who is going to be using it and where are you going to store their information. Now, identity can be a scary topic at first, but today we're going to look at demystifying it a little. Today I'm going to show you a quick history of where Office 365 identity comes from and the introduction of Azure Active Directory. We're going to learn some really important terms, and I'm going to introduce 4 new models for identity management. We're going to also look at some useful tools and look at what's coming next when it comes to identity management. Let's get started. Why do we care about identity, and what is it? Well, when people move to the cloud, they're really looking for one thing: an enhanced productivity experience. They're looking for it to be always up to date, easy to maintain, and for their tools to be scalable. And when we remove our tools from the equation, that's when we remove Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, we get rid of Outlook. Really, by moving to the cloud, users are looking for one thing. They're looking to enable the right individuals to have access to the right resources at the right times and for the right reasons. Now, the right individuals, that doesn't just necessarily mean people that work for us. That could be people inside or outside the business. Access to the right resources. Do they have permission to access the files they want to access? The right time, when they need the information, where they need it, on the right device. Making sure it's available for them when they want to access it, rather than having to constantly go and make access requests. And then for the right reasons. Do we have reason to believe, for example, that someone is doing something malicious with access to the data? Is employee X suddenly siphoning off terabytes and terabytes of information out of our tenant that isn't something that they'd normally do? And that's where identity management comes into it. The modern practice of identity management is the cornerstone for enabling this experience. It provides protection for information, that's the right people at the right resources, and it also empowers people. It gives them access to the information at the right time, on the right devices, and for the right reasons. And we're going to dive into this today with identity management and show you why effective identity management enables all of the modern collaboration experiences across Office 365. Let's first dive into protection. As we consider the future, it's often instructive for us to look back at the past. Since the early days of communication, diplomats and military commanders knew it was necessary to provide some mechanism to protect the confidentiality of correspondence, and to have some means of detecting whether or not it had been tampered with. For the most part, protection was achieved through application of procedural handling. People made sure that the information only stayed with people that were able to have it, and it stayed in the hands of, say, couriers or diplomats. In 50 BC, Julius Caesar was credited with the invention of the Caesar cipher, which was created in order to prevent his secret messages from being read should the message fall into the wrong hands. This was a basic substitution encoding in which each letter in the plain text alphabet is replaced by another letter some fixed number of positions down the alphabet. For example, with a right shift of 6, D would be replaced with J, and K would be replaced with Q, and so on. This encryption step, performed by a Caesar cipher, is often incorporated as part of more complex schemes and still has modern application in the systems we use today. In fact, this basic substitution encoding is still what we use in some of our most complex algorithms for encryption. As with all single self-alphabet substitution ciphers, the Caesar cipher was easily broken, but the concept is really important for us as it sets the groundwork for hashing, which we're going to come to later. Now, as time went on, information protection matured, controls were developed, and sensitive information was marked up to indicate that it should be protected and transported by trusted persons. Of course, with greater protection came smarter thieves. As postal services expanded and governments created official organisations to intercept and decipher, read and reseal letters, for example, the UK Secret Office of Deciphering, we saw that the method of protecting the information also got more complex. We saw the infamous Enigma machine during World War II, which famously encrypted information in a way that couldn't necessarily be decrypted. Then we saw ARPANET and the birth of networked computers. Information could travel at never-before-seen speeds and needed broader levels of protection available to everyone. This was when the world welcomed the digital password, and on ARPANET we saw the first digital password in action. Just a decade ago, password theft seemed the province of poorly protected Hotmail or AIM accounts. But these days, virtually every company with access to our personal data has been hacked. The password is the sentry that guards this mass of sensitive data. Credit card information, addresses, social security numbers. But despite its introduction, when we saw the introduction of ARPANET over 50 years ago, it hasn't really changed. The landscape of hacking, however, has. Bill Gates, back in 2004, declared the password dead. We still use the password, however, to protect our most sensitive data. Let's take a tally of where we found ourselves, shall we? Studies show that we log in to some 30 to 40 sensitive sites a day, with 10 of them containing some high business impact information. Some of us ask for 2 tiers of security, which helps protect it, but for a lot of these sites, we don't. Often, people are actually using the same passwords for multiple sites, despite our best intent. The 7 most popular passwords last year are shown here. Number 1 password remains, to this day, the word password. So what comes next? How do we fight bad passwords? How do we encrypt our information in a way that saves us from password theft and identity theft? That's where OAuth comes in. OAuth is an open standard for authentication, commonly used as a way for internet users to authorize websites to access their information without actually giving them their password. The OAuth standards allow services to securely talk to each other without exchanging credentials. A great example of this is when you log in to a newspaper site like the New York Times using your Facebook account. You're not telling the New York Times your Facebook password, but Facebook is authenticating on your behalf. Because the system essentially allows for tokens to be issued to a third party and authorization to a server, it allows you to use any form of second factor, from cell phones to biometrics, to ensure that your password and your information is protected. Microsoft calls our implementation of the OAuth standards modern authentication, and we'll cover this a little bit later in today's presentation. But it's important to note that by choosing the right identity framework, you can take advantage of the added security of modern authentication in a future-proofed way. Right, we talked a little bit about protection and how it led to OAuth and modern authentication. Let's talk a little bit about empowerment. How can identity make sure that people have access to the right resources and the right information at the right time and for the right reasons? Back in 1450, we saw the introduction of the information era with the advent of the printing press in the 1400s. The printing press was the first democratizing event that made access to information possible for humans everywhere. And access to information has only spread. Every walk of life has changed because of it. We've seen the introduction of Web 1.0. That was the one-way, readable web, information that was disseminated but not able to be interacted with. Web 2.0 came along. This is two-way communication, or the writable web, where not only were stories published, but people could comment on stories and interact. And now we're in this world of Web 3.0, the multi-dimensional collaborative web, or the executable web, where we're expected to be able to run information on the web in real time. We want our cloud applications not only to talk to us, but also to talk to each other to make sure that our information is more usable. And we need to be able to authorize those applications to talk to each other in ways that make our life useful, but keep our information safe. The way we work has changed. Employees are working on nearly 2 times the number of teams they did 5 years ago. But in fact, 41% of employees say that mobile apps are changing the way they work. You want to make sure that you're giving employees access to both work on those teams and share team resources, and also work on these mobile devices in a way that protects your information. My office now follows me. I can accidentally, for the first time ever, leave my office in a coffee shop. It's no longer confined to our desk, and we no longer just have to protect the physical security of our office. But if I leave my computer open on a desk in a coffee shop, anyone can access the information. Now, this accelerates innovation and responsiveness, problem solving and learning. It allows us to tap into the on-demand talent pool rather than going through hierarchical organizational structures. But it also poses risks for the business as well. Cybersecurity attacks have been a great headache for IT organizations. Even large organizations and reputable financial organizations and governments are not immune to these threats. 81% of breaches today are caused by credential theft. That's that basic password we talked about that hasn't changed in so many years, that's still protecting most of our information. We talked about duplicates. 73% of passwords, in fact, are duplicates across services. And lastly, but certainly not least, 80% of employees admit to using non-work approved apps for work. This is a really important statistic. When we look at what employees are doing daily, they want to collaborate. And if new software is available for them to work on that's going to increase their own productivity, we want to enable them to use it. But if we're not set up in a way that allows them to use not only that software, but also your organization's data, you're in a position where your employees will siphon that data off into third-party services without your knowledge, and that poses a substantial security risk to your business. So let's look at how identity is going to solve this risk. The traditional practice of identity management really looked at it in basic terms. It looked at a single user's access to files, to conversations, maybe to people and groups, and also to different events. And we had a single authentication point for each of the users that wanted to access each of those resources. The modern practice of identity framework differs slightly in that we put the user at the center of the productivity experience. By looking at user actions, by looking at statistics and analytics around what that user is doing, we can proactively make sure that they have access to resources and that they're also collaborating in ways that we as a company approve of. Let's take a look at what modern identity looks like in the context of this framework. Here I am looking at the Microsoft Delve profile for Patrick Stanton. What I can see here is what we would traditionally think of when we think about an Office 365 identity experience. I can see his name, first and last. I can see his role title, he's an audience evangelism manager, and I can also see where he's based, in Sydney. What I can also see here is his email address, his Skype for Business address, and his phone number and his OneDrive, as well as his calendar as well. Now, this is traditionally what we expect when we think of a directory experience. However, because we are powering our new identity here in the cloud, and we've put Patrick at the center of his identity experience, what we're also able to do is surface a lot more information, not only about Patrick, but also about who he's working with and what he's working on. I can see in here an organization chart. I can see where Patrick fits into the organization and also who he's working with on the right-hand side. I can see documents that Patrick and I have shared together, but I can also see here documents that are trending from around Patrick Stanton. And that's because we're using the Microsoft Graph to craft this experience and make sure that it's not only personal, but that Patrick is put at the center of it. Another great experience that we're able to power through a modern identity framework is My Analytics. Here you can see how I've been working and who I've been working with. I can see meeting hours, email hours, and focus hours, as well as the amount of time that I'm spending doing work after hours. I can see where I'm investing my time and who I'm investing that time with. I can see who I'm losing track of conversations with and who I need to be reaching out to more. I can also do great things like see how often I'm in recurring meetings and also how often I'm multitasking in meetings. Multitasking in meetings is a really powerful stat because it helps me understand if I should be in those meetings. If I'm spending all of my time emailing other people while I'm in those meetings, it's probably not useful for me to be sitting there. This is what we mean by putting someone at the center of their identity experience. And these are some of the great new scenarios that we're able to show you through the modern identity framework and the Microsoft Graph. But as we look at enabling some of these great new scenarios, there are some challenges that come up along the way. Where does this leave us today? Well, today, on average, we see there to be around 7.2 devices per person. 7.2 connected devices. That's your mobile phone, your tablet, your computer at home, your computer at work perhaps. And each one of those devices needs a login in order to secure the information that's on that device. Not only do those devices need a login, but you also need to do useful things on those devices. And to do useful things, you need access to information. This could be some on-premises information, this could be information in a public cloud like Azure, or it could be in your organization's private cloud as well. Not only that, but you might have managed devices, devices provided by your organization specifically for work use. This also requires a login and an authentication point. And then last but certainly not least, we look at a situation where we have all of these great new cloud applications and services available to us. We have Box, Dropbox, Amazon Web Services, SAP, Basecamp, Salesforce, and Force.com. All these great services that are available to us, but each of these services require each user to log in to get access to the information. They then also require authentication to get the information from your on-premises servers, your cloud-based service, or your database storage into those information as well. When you look at what that looks like on a daily basis, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of points of connectivity and thousands of points of authentication that you as an Office 365 administrator are going to have to manage if you want to enable your organization to work in a collaborative, modern productivity framework. That's where Identity as a Service comes in, or IDaaS. Identity is the cornerstone that can enable all of these experiences and provide you with a number of additional benefits. At Microsoft, our Identity as a Service platform is called Microsoft Azure AD, and it controls the connections not only between users and devices, but users and services, devices and services, and information and services as well. Microsoft Azure AD enables a number of great new scenarios to take place, and really as a service that stands alone, it's taken off. You can see in here that we have 950 million users. That's 45% increase from this time last year. We also support over 272,000 third-party authentications through Microsoft Azure AD every single month. Now that's a huge number of authentications, and it shows that that platform, built on the OAuth standards for open authentication, is not only scalable, but supports any sort of identity scenario that your business might encounter. Azure Active Directory is the identity experience that powers Office 365, but it also powers a number of great other experiences that you automatically get as a Microsoft 365 customer. Things like self-service capabilities, allowing a user to reset their password not only for one service, but for all services at once. Single sign-on to all of your software as a service applications. And then multi-factor authentication, either through the multi-factor authentication that Microsoft provides, or your own custom multi-factor authentication that you might want on premises. Now, every Office 365 customer automatically has Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to show you what that looks like now. Here I am in the Office 365 Admin Center, which should be familiar to all our Office 365 administrators out there. On the left-hand side, I've gone in and I've chosen to add a new user. And I'm going to show you how adding a user in Office 365 is reflected instantly in Azure Active Directory, because that is the service that's powering the Office 365 identity experience. I'm going to go in here and add Stephen Miller. His display name is automatically generated for me. I'm going to choose an email address here, which is just Steve Miller. And I'm going to set his location as the United States. Now I can go through here and I can also set some contact information, his job title, his city. I can set a password for him if I wanted to generate a password, and I could assign some roles if I wanted to assign him as a global administrator. Now, one of the things I do have to do when I add a new user is assign them a license. So I'm going to assign them an Enterprise Mobility and Security E5, as well as an Office 365 license in here as well. And here we go. I'm going to go and add that user. Now, Stephen's been added, and I can see in here that I've got his email address. And we're going to send an email with all of these details, and then we're good to go. Now, because I have Office 365 and I'm logged in here as an Office 365 administrator, I also automatically have Azure Active Directory. And to access Azure Active Directory, I simply go to portal.azure.com. And it will automatically sign me in to Azure Active Directory with my Office 365 credentials, or my admin credentials. On the left-hand side, you can see Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to go ahead and open that here. This Azure Active Directory identity experience powers Office 365, but also adds a ton of really advanced capabilities for identity management right from within the dashboard. First, what I want to do is just show you how that user that we just created is reflected in Azure Active Directory. I'm going to go into my user list here, and I'm going to type Stephen. And there we go. We have Stephen Miller with his Stephen Miller at contosoprep.onmicrosoft.com email address. And I can see that he's just a member. We didn't create him as a global admin. I can go and I can add users from here as well. I can add guest users. I can add a group. I can also find users, and I can take specific actions on those users as well. One of the great things that we've just talked about with Office 365 and Azure Active Directory isn't just that it powers the experience for Office 365, but that it will also power your identity and your single sign-on to a range of third-party applications as well. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. On the left-hand side, I can see Enterprise Applications, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now, in the tenant that we have set up here, I can see that we already have over 100 enterprise applications set up to use. I can see that there's the 3 applications that are being used the most here are the Office 365 suite. But I can also see how many people are signing in to each of the different applications as well. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a new application to my tenant for people to sign in with. Now, we have a gallery here with a range of applications that we've pre-templated to make this process a whole lot easier for you. You can see everything in here from Box to Google Apps, as well as Jive, the Microsoft Cloud, DocuSign, and it's really easy to go in here and just add those applications. I'm going to go in this case and add Workplace by Facebook. Now, I can see a little bit of details here. I can see what I'm going to call the app, and I can customize that if I want to. I can see who the publisher is, and I can see the process that this publisher is going to use for single sign-on. Now, in this case, it's going to be a SAML-based single sign-on. I'm going to add that. And up the right-hand side, you can see that we're now adding that application to our tenant. Now, when I add the application to the tenant, when it's successful, I'm able to go through here and configure some separate properties. I can create some test users to check that it's going to work quickly, and then I can very easily assign a user for testing and deploy it to that user. Where this becomes really powerful is that once I've tested it and checked that this application is what I want to do, I can go and deploy this application to everyone in my tenant quickly and easily for them to access in their app launchers with just a number of clicks. By doing this, we're making it easier than ever to reduce the amount of shadow IT in your organization and deploy applications to your employees in no time. I'm going to go in here and add a user for testing. I click Add User, go into Users and Groups, and I'm going to search for a name here. I'm going to search for myself, and I'm going to assign this user for testing. There we go. Now, if I go back to my Office 365 dashboard and open the app launcher, I can see in my app space here that I have Workplace by Facebook ready to go. I can pin that, I can work with it as if it was an application in my organization, even part of the Office 365 environment. And if I'd gone through the process of setting up single sign-on, when I click this, it would automatically authenticate me and sign me in to make that process simple and easy. Now that we've looked at some of the great, powerful opportunities that you have when you move to a cloud-based identity framework and Azure Active Directory, I want to talk to you about how you get your users into that service to begin with. Now, before we begin, we have some very separate directories, and I want to make sure that it's very clear how these work. Microsoft has 2 managed identity systems. The first one is the Microsoft account. This is your Hotmail or your Outlook account, what you use to sign into your Xbox. There's no organizational commitment for this, but what it is Microsoft signing a terms of service and a terms of use with the end user. Organizational identities are for work or school accounts. There's no interaction between Microsoft and the end user. We don't send them emails, we don't communicate with them or advertise to them, but it allows you to centrally manage these users through your admin portal. The commitment is between Microsoft and your organization. Today we're going to be talking about the organizational account. Now, the way we work with identities has changed over time. From the left, we began as organizations on premises. We used System Center. We had a directory where we stored all of our servers. We made sure that everything was managed on premises because that was both where our users were and where our information was stored. And then we had the mobile revolution. We saw BYOD and shadow IT. People began to bring mobiles into the workforce and they wanted to be able to check their email on those phones. Suddenly, we looked at a hybrid world. We needed Intune to allow people to authenticate on different devices. And we needed people to be able to access information both from on-premises and from outside the business as well. Then we saw the cloud revolution, the transformative cloud. We needed to deploy cloud-enabled rich clients. We needed to allow API services to work. And we allowed for authentication at multiple endpoints. We also saw an increase in the need for security, and we saw second factors of authentication be introduced. And because of these 3 separate periods in our history, we ended up with 3 very separate models for authentication. Now, there are two parts to this discussion before we begin. The first question I want you to ask yourselves as we go through this presentation is, where do we store the names of your users? Now, this is going to impact a lot of things, like the SharePoint People Picker, instant messaging, internal email. But you want to ask yourself, where are the names of my users being stored? The second question I want you to ask yourself is, how do people sign in? How do we validate the access? On the left-hand side here, we have synchronized identity. We have federated identity in the middle, and we have a new identity framework that we're going to talk about that's very similar to that. And then we have cloud identity on the right-hand side. We're focusing on Office 365, but the same principles are going to apply for Azure Active Directory if you're using it across other applications as well. Let's dive in. Synchronized identity. Now, remember these first two questions. The first question was, where do we store our users? In this case, we're storing our users in an on-premises directory still. The second question, how do our users sign in? Our users are signing in to Office 365. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. So how do we get our users into Office 365 if we're storing them in our on-premises directory? Well, we use a tool called Azure AD Connect. Azure AD Connect synchronizes our usernames and passwords up to the cloud at a periodic basis that you can set. We don't need to go back to your organization's on-premises AD for those passwords or for those usernames. We simply sign in with the cloud with the store that we have there. This is a really quick and easy way for you to get your information to the cloud by downloading the Azure AD Connect tool, setting it up, and using the default settings. We'll get your information up to the cloud really quickly. Now, a lot of people ask us, what about my passwords? Are they really safe to have in the cloud? We talked a little bit earlier on about password hashing. Password hashing is the encryption that we apply to passwords to make them strong and to make them irreversible. Password hashing is very, very hard to reverse, and it's a strong security feature that's offered by Active Directory. Traditionally, when you stored your usernames and passwords in an on-premises Active Directory environment, we hashed those passwords for you. And that meant that we did the encryption on those passwords and stored them in a very, very long string of text called a digest. Now, when you move your on-premises directory to the cloud, we actually go through and we apply an extra layer of security to them again. We not only encrypt those passwords again, but we also transfer those passwords over an SSL encrypted connection. So it's very secure, in fact more secure, to have your passwords in the cloud than it may necessarily be to have them in your on-premises environment. When should you use synchronized identity? Well, it's very easy to set up and it's very basic. So if you already have an on-premises directory, this is the model you probably want to use to get started straight away. If you know you're going to want to move to a more advanced identity framework later on, or you're running a pilot of Office 365, this might be a great opportunity for you to do it as well. If your AD health is good. If your AD health isn't good and your on-premises directory is a bit of a mess, this might be a great time to cut ties with your on-premises directory and move your identity directly into the cloud. Scenario 2. Federated identity. Now, federated identity is a more advanced method of identity management, but it also allows you to have a lot more control and advanced capabilities. Let's go back to our questions. Where are our users stored? Well, in this case, on the right-hand side, our users are still stored in that on-premises Active Directory. Where do our users log in? The second question. Well, users for this time aren't signing into Office 365, they're actually authenticating against our on-premises directory. How does this work? Well, when a user goes to authenticate against Office 365, we identify that that user's domain name authenticates via the federated model, and we send them to Active Directory Federated Services, or ADFS. ADFS is a tool that connects the internet to your on-premises directory, and it allows you to implement all the authentication and validation points that you want to as part of your sign-in process. Now, we're still synchronizing your user accounts to Office 365, but we're not taking your passwords up there. Instead, the user goes and authenticates against ADFS, we validate that that user exists on premises, and then we're able to send them back to the cloud with a note to Office 365 saying that the authentication was valid and to let them in. There are a number of reasons you might want to use ADFS. You may already have ADFS set up for other third-party services. So you're already validating against your on-premises directory for third-party cloud or your line of business applications. If you want to use third-party multi-factor authentication, so you may use biometric or some other multi-factor authentication method that isn't necessarily supported in the cloud, federated services is the way for you to do that, because you can simply redirect the user at the point of login over to that service. And then lastly, latency and security. If you want to immediately restrict access to a user's account once you've deleted their user in ADFS, and you don't want there to be any issues with synchronization, this could be an opportunity for you as well. Now, there are some downsides to this. Because we are always validating against your on-premises directory, it does mean that if your internet goes down, or you're doing some server work and migrating servers, that we may not be able to allow your employees to have access to their Office 365 environment during that period. This undermines the promise of the cloud. If someone can't access Office 365 because you're migrating your server environment on premises, then you're somewhat undermining their ability to work anywhere at any time and on any device. And that's why we introduced Password Sync Backup for federated sign-in. This allows you to quickly and easily switch over to a synchronized model, the model we previously talked about, and synchronize your passwords up to the cloud prior to doing any maintenance on your servers or changing your infrastructure. In this model, if your ADFS infrastructure goes down, for example, you lose your internet connection, then your users can still sign in because they will sign in using a synchronized model with their passwords synchronized up to the cloud. If you're redeploying and you're reconfiguring those servers, you can do what you need to do, then bring them back online, turn off the synchronized identity model, and revert back to your ADFS sign-in. So a quick and easy way to make sure that it's globally redundant and that you maintain access to your cloud services. So, when should you use ADFS? Well, you want to determine if your security or compliance policies within your organization really require this configuration. It is more complex, and that means that there's more opportunities for things to go wrong in the configuration. ADFS requires additional servers to implement, so make sure you plan your hardware and system requirements accordingly. Third-party providers don't support password hash sync, so if you want your users to sign in on premises, then this is what you'll need to use. Right. Let's look at a brand new identity model called pass-through identity. Pass-through identity is really similar to federated sign-in. And essentially what it allows you to do is set up a model where we're still pinging your on-premises Active Directory every time a user logs in. But you no longer have to set up a complex ADFS environment. In this scenario, you install an API connector to your on-premises Active Directory environment, and you allow Office 365 to securely connect via this API and validate logins every single time. What we do is we take the user's login from Office 365, and over the API, we ping the Active Directory environment on premises to check that the username and password is correct, and then allow the user access to your servers. Scenario 3, cloud identity. This is the most simple of all of the identity models. This is where you sever the connection with your on-premises directory and you move it immediately to the cloud. This can be done in multiple ways. You can choose to synchronize your identity up to the cloud and then sever the connection and just manage your identity via Azure Active Directory. Or you can export your data in an Excel spreadsheet via CSV and upload it to the cloud if you wanted to. A last option for you to do this is you could simply go to the cloud and manually enter each of the new users if your business is starting from fresh. We recommend cloud identity because you're going to get the advantage of Azure Active Directory and all the new software and tools that are available via that service. It's a really simple model for users as well. Users simply log into the cloud service and we do all of the connection in the back end. You don't have to worry about maintaining an on-premises environment and you don't have to worry about synchronization. This is really useful for companies like GameStop. GameStop have a lot of transient part-time employees, sometimes students, but they need to know the latest information, and they all brought their own devices. By enabling cloud identity, they can simply create a user, distribute their password to them, and allow them to access the information on their own device. You should use this if you have a distributed mobile workforce. It's a really simple way, and it also allows you to use all of the new cloud features that come as part of Azure Active Directory. If you've got rich profiles and you want to make sure that people understand who the people are that they're working with across the organization, even if they haven't met them, Azure Active Directory supports great new profile experiences. And if you have a small IT department and a budget, this is definitely the one for you because you don't need to plan hardware requirements accordingly. Now that I've shown you how you move your users to Office 365 and to the cloud, I want to show you some of the new capabilities that you have in terms of managing those users and their sign-in as well. We saw a little bit at the start of this presentation about some of the advantages for the end users, but this is specifically some of the new capabilities that are available for admins when managing users. The first thing I want to show you is multi-factor authentication. We talked a lot at the start of the presentation about password theft and how it's so risky for your business and for the information that you're trying to keep secure. Multi-factor authentication can quickly and easily secure your business by requiring a second stage of authentication when a user logs in. Something like a mobile phone call, a fingerprint, or even Windows Hello and a face scan. I want to show you how quickly and easy it is to go in and set up multi-factor authentication on a user. Here I am in the Office 365 Admin Center, and I'm looking at my users. Remember the user we created at the start of this presentation, Stephen Miller? I'm going to go in here and select Stephen. On the right-hand side, I've got some tools like reset password, delete user, and I've got some more settings down here, including edit his Skype for Business properties and manage the multi-factor authentication settings. I can click on the multi-factor authentication settings here, and it's going to open the Azure Active Directory dashboard for me. Here are all the multi-factor authentication settings for my organization. Now, I could choose to apply it to everyone. I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm going to go through and I'm going to find Stephen. And here is Stephen at the bottom of the page. I'm going to select Stephen and I'm going to click Enable. Now, we'll give you a guide here for what actually happens when you enable multi-factor authentication. But by enabling multi-factor authentication here, I've now set Stephen up that next time he logs in, he has to choose how his multi-factor authentication works. This is a really quick and easy action for an administrator, but it's going to make sure that all the data within your business is super secure, and it puts the onus on the employee to set that multi-factor authentication up for themselves. Another way that you can make sure that your data isn't being phished is to make sure that your login page looks unique to your organization. And I'm going to show you how you can customize the login page in Azure Active Directory to make it unique for your business. Here I am in Azure Active Directory again. I've got my user and groups and my enterprise applications that we talked about before, but I've got this button down here called Company Branding, and I'm going to go in here and select Company Branding. Now, I can go ahead and I can select company branding and create different company branding for each of the languages in use across my organization. In this case, I'm going to select English, United States, and I'm going to go in and upload a picture of Seattle because that's where my company is based. You can see that the picture is uploaded there and I can see a nice thumbnail of it. I can go in here, I can put some username hints if the usernames for my business are all in a particular format, even some sign-in page text, including hello, welcome to the business, or anything you might want to say, as well as going in here and changing the background color if I want to. This all looks good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and press save. You can see in here that we're creating the tenant branding for us, and it's saving those settings. Now I'm going to sign in with Steve Miller's email address and show you not only the company branding that we just set up, but also the multi-factor setup process. Here I am at office.com. I'm going to type Steve's email address. And what we can see here is my company branding is still applied, but that for added security, Microsoft needs more details from Steve to verify his account. Here I can get the setup process, where I can choose either an authentication phone number or to use the mobile app. I can select my country or region and add in my phone number, and then choose either to get a text or a call every time I sign in. If I chose the mobile app, I could either receive notifications for verification, or I can use a verification code every time I want to sign in. So quick and easy steps that any employee within the organization can follow to set up multi-factor authentication on their account. If I choose to verify using a verification code, I'll get a QR code here. Now with my cell phone, I can scan this QR code and follow the instructions on my phone to set up multi-factor authentication. As we come to the close of today's presentation, I want to emphasize that as you move to the cloud and you bring your identity not only into Office 365, but into Azure Active Directory, that you will be able to use this new identity framework with any of the other line of business applications throughout your organization as well. The 270,000 organizational apps that are used every day with Azure Active Directory are all going to be available for you simply by using the gallery in Azure Active Directory or by setting up a manual connection. So it's a really great opportunity for you to not only move to Office 365, but really accelerate your entire business's journey to the cloud. That's it for today's session. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you reach out if you have any questions about some of the content that you've heard from today, and we look forward to talking to you about your identity requirements in the future. Thanks a lot.